My name is Samiha Rahman. I just turned 23 years old and recently graduated from Western University with a Bachelor's of Medical Sciences. I'm a caregiver for my mother who suffers from ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, or also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. ALS is a neurodegenerative disease, slowly paralyzing all the muscles of your body till you can no longer breathe, talk, or move on your own. My mother was diagnosed almost 12 years ago in 2011 when I was only 12 years old. She was given a prognosis of only 2 to 5 years, but thankfully she is still here with us today. I became a caregiver at a very young age. I would come home straight from school and had responsibilities beyond completing homework, assignments, and regular chores. I always had to be cognizant of what my mother was doing, what she needed, and how I could help. For example, my mother needed support with feeding, drinking, and using the washroom, bathing, and adjusting her position. At the beginning of her journey, she used a walker, but slowly she transitioned to rely on a wheelchair and eventually became bedbound. I have a younger sister who was only 3 years old at the time of my mother's diagnosis, so I also had to make sure my younger sister was eating, bathing, and being taken care of as well. My father would go to work early in the morning and would come home in the evenings. So it was during that time that I just had to be aware of everything going on in the house. Because of my responsibilities in the home, I didn't really have any time for other extracurricular activities or social outings with my friends. It's hard and a little traumatizing to explain to your friends over and over again about your mother's terminal illness. You feel like no one truly understands that. Being a caregiver is one of the hardest responsibilities anyone could take on. So, mixing that in with being just a child, you can imagine how lonely and isolating that is being a young caregiver. It was 3 years after my mother's diagnosis, when I was 15 years old, I was introduced to the Young Carers Program, or YCP, by Hospice Toronto. Being introduced to YCP was a very pivotal moment in my life for several reasons. Of course, I was introduced to different resources and support, but the most effective thing for me was probably one of the more simpler things. Just knowing that there were other kids like me out there and that we were gaining some type of recognition. For those 3 years, age 12 to 15, I didn't know that there was a term for other kids like me, a young carer.
Hello, my name is Rebekah, and I'm a young adult caregiver to my parent who lives with a rare schizoaffective condition and is recovering from addictions. The Young Caregivers Association has been an important and special place for me, and I am super excited to share more about them. The Young Caregivers Association, or the YCA, is an organization that aims to support young caregivers and their families through offering a variety of programs and services. Specifically, the YCA offers weekly social recreational programs designed to provide young caregivers with opportunities for skill development and time to themselves. The YCA also offers in-school programs and clinical services, such as individual counseling and clinical groups. Further, the YCA has established a youth advisory council, where young caregivers are actively involved in the decisions that influence their own lives. I've been a caregiver since I was about 10 or so, but did not become aware of the YCA until my mid-20s. As a result, I navigated my childhood as a young caregiver without any sort of formal support. Once I found the YCA, I quickly connected with them through research and later volunteer and practice. I can see the YCA's impact firsthand in the kids I work with and in myself. The YCA supports young caregivers in developing friendships, navigating emotions, and ultimately provides young caregivers with a space to be themselves, all of which would have greatly benefited me in my childhood and young adulthood. Ava, a young caregiver, will now speak about the YCA's impact in her own life.
Hi, my name is Ava, and I'm 12 years old. I take care of my grandma who has dementia. I live with her, so I take care of her on a daily basis. Powerhouse has helped me because I have met people who I can relate with, and I share the experiences with. Powerhouse is my safe place because I go on Zoom calls with people that understand me and counselors who will help me. Overall, Powerhouse has a positive impact in my life.
As part of the Petro-Canada grant, the YCA was able to develop the Knowledge Centre, directly integrating the voices and perspectives of young caregivers and professionals through interviews. The Knowledge Centre acts as a hub for resources aimed to support healthcare professionals, educators, parents, and young caregivers in supporting and identifying young caregivers and their families. Further, the YCAs continue to have a role in research. Specifically, as part of my own master's research, our team, in partnership with the YCA and Young Carers program, used participatory action research to explore leisure in the lives of young caregivers. Through research, the YCA has begun to better support young caregivers in diverse ways.
The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence is calling on the Government of Canada to work with stakeholders, caregivers, and people with lived experience from across our country to develop the first ever national caregiving strategy. The time to do this is now. It's time to recognize that caregiving is a standalone public policy issue that needs to be addressed by senior orders of government with significant policy scope to solve these problems both for today and for the future. Young carers need to be part of this conversation, guided in part by the draft Commonwealth Charter for Young Carers. For example, work on this strategy needs to recognize that young people in Canada and all over the world are endowed with certain inalienable rights that cannot be pushed aside as the needs of the people for which they're providing care take place front and center. It's time for all of our governments to recognize that this is an issue and that there are various policy instruments that can be marshaled to solve these issues. For example, around income support and support for carers in the workplace. Caregiving is the next frontier of public policy in Canada, and we feel that by working together, we can really make a difference for caregivers and care providers across the country.
Our study aimed to understand how the pandemic impacted young caregivers and their families. What we have here are the findings from the young caregivers and the service providers who serve this population. So what did young caregivers have to say? Many young caregivers felt an increase in their caregiving responsibilities. Although they weren't new, they had to spend more time on caregiving, especially if the person they were caring for was also in school. Just an example, for those attending school, what was impacted most were their mornings and afternoons, where they basically had to spend all their spare time and breaks entertaining their siblings or suddenly having to leave in the middle of class to help their sibling or siblings. There were also a disparity in Wi-Fi access that made it difficult to consistently attend classes for those in rural areas and small towns. Those living in cities had their own issues of overcrowding of outdoor public spaces like parks. Young caregivers, depending mainly on their age and the needs of the person being cared for, were quite anxious about finances. Young caregivers and or their family members experienced job loss or wage cuts, and their family members getting infected by COVID. They were often quite burned out due to feelings of not having personal space, breaks, or respite. Services were definitely disrupted, and virtual versions were often poor alternatives. For example, online programming wasn't engaging, or it was only available in English. Or some services just disappear completely, leaving some families, for example, those who are caring for someone experiencing autism, to find ways of filling the role of a therapist, all the while experiencing increased challenges from worsening behavioral issues, which made it more difficult for young caregivers to even want to provide care.
So I'll be talking a little bit about an exciting new research project called Recognizing, Identifying, and Supporting the Engagement of Youth Providing Care. So this research project has stemmed out of an identified gap, which is that we don't really know a lot about how young carers in Canada interact with the healthcare system in their caring roles. So to address these gaps, our project has two phases. The first phase, we will be surveying healthcare providers across the country to learn about their awareness of young carers and gaps that they have to supporting young carers. The second phase is using something called co-design, which is working with young carers and healthcare providers with support from caregiving organizations to actually develop tools that can support young carers as they interact with the healthcare system. So the national survey will be launched end of summer or early fall 2023, which will be followed by that co-design phase where we'll be working with young carers and healthcare providers. And our findings and the tool that we can co-produce will be spread throughout the spring of 2024.
We know that there are at least 1.5 million young caregivers in Canada, and probably quite a few more. We also know that young caregivers are hard to identify and have been underserved. At the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, we've made supporting young caregivers a priority, and we have convened a national network, our Young Caregiver Roundtable, to share best practices and models, to foster partnership opportunities, to learn from each other coast to coast to coast, and to advise on policy priorities. We have more than 40 agencies involved in this project, and we hope to see it grow, and we hope to continue to support young caregivers across the country.
En 2021, c'est le lancement de la politique nationale pour les personnes proches aidantes. Dans cette politique-là, on vient notamment élargir la définition du concept de proche aidant. On y inclut entre autres l'accompagnement d'une personne qui vit avec des incapacités au niveau psychologique, psychosocial, puis on souligne aussi que peu importe son âge, c'est possible de jouer un rôle comme proche aidant. Vient ensuite le plan d'action interministériel en santé mentale 2022-2026. Dans ce plan d'action-là, le Réseau Avant de Craquer, c'est la seule organisation qui a une mission indépendante à celle du ministère à être en charge de la mise en œuvre d'une des mesures. Cette mesure-là, c'est le projet Aider Sans Filtre. Aider Sans Filtre, ça découle du fait que dans les associations du Réseau Avant de Craquer, on soulignait que les jeunes proches en santé mentale étaient peu présents dans les services. On sait pourtant qu'ils sont nombreux. On sait aussi que les impacts au fait d'accompagner une personne qui vit avec des difficultés au niveau de sa santé mentale lorsqu'on est jeune peuvent être très grands. On sait aussi que les jeunes sont peu ou pas au courant qu'il existe des services pour eux, puis que les services disponibles ne sont pas forcément adaptés à leur réalité et à leurs besoins. Aider sans filtre, c'est l'embauche de l'équivalent de 35 agentes de sensibilisation puis de soutien. Ces agentes-là ont pour rôle d'aller à la rencontre des jeunes, d'aller sensibiliser les jeunes à la réalité des jeunes proches, de les informer qu'il existe des services, puis d'offrir du soutien aux jeunes proches qui peuvent en avoir besoin. Tout ça, ça se passe dans une approche pour et avec. L'équipe de projet puis la majorité des agentes de sensibilisation puis de soutien sont notamment âgés de 30 ans et moins. Dans l'équipe de projet, on accorde également une grande importance aux rétroactions et aux commentaires des agentes, puisque ce sont eux qui sont en contact avec les jeunes au quotidien, qui sont sur le terrain. On est aussi entouré de différents partenaires, tant au niveau jeunesse, comme par exemple avec Air Ouverte, qu'au niveau de la proche-aidance, notamment avec l'appui. On a vraiment hâte de voir où ce projet-là va nous mener. Pour le moment, on peut dire que dans plusieurs associations, on a le commentaire qu'il y a de plus en plus de jeunes.
Au regroupement des aidantes et aidants naturels de Montréal, nous croyons que les établissements scolaires peuvent être des acteurs importants dans le soutien offert aux jeunes proches aidants au Québec. C'est pourquoi notre organisme a mis sur pied un projet qui se déploiera dans 6 écoles montréalaises au courant de l'année prochaine. Les objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés sont de sensibiliser le milieu scolaire et les personnes qui y travaillent à la question de la jeune proche aidance, de créer des focus groupes avec des jeunes proches aidants pour nous aider à mieux comprendre leur réalité et leurs besoins d'accommodement, et puis finalement, aider les écoles à mettre en place des mesures de conciliation, responsabilité familiale, études. Nous pensons que des milieux qui se sentent concernés par le bien-être des jeunes proches aidants sont des milieux qui favorisent la persévérance scolaire et par le fait même, la réussite de ces jeunes.
Quebec has moved forward quickly on the policy front, so we have 2 points in our plan d'action that are explicitly about young carers. The first dictates the creation of the Aider Sans Filtre project, and the second commissions a sweeping study that's going to establish the prevalence of young carers across all educational levels in the province, and create a guide for the Ministry of Education. Still, I hear in our support groups that young people have trouble identifying with this concept of being a caregiver, especially where mental health is concerned, and especially where they have a different cultural understanding of what care, family, and family responsibilities look like. As a young adult that gives and receives care on a daily basis, I also struggle to see myself in the common conception of what caregivers look like. My care has been for my peers and for my chosen family, and is, like so many young carers tell me, just something that I do. This lack of awareness is even present in schools, where the core feedback that I receive from educators is that they didn't have a word for this, but they did know that students of theirs were struggling with stressors at home that are consistent with being young carers. Having a diversity of perspectives on what care means for youth in our National Roundtable, in the local and Quebecois projects underway, and in our upcoming Quebec Symposium on Young Carers has fueled me personally, and it's informed how AMI-Quebec is tackling this as a youth mental health and child welfare issue, and as an opportunity to learn from youth about this next frontier of our social understanding of mental health. This charter gives us a united language to talk about this and have young carers recognize themselves, and it gives us a framework of rights to continue the fight for recognition.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Alex, the Program Coordinator for the Young Carers Program through Hospice Toronto. The Young Carers Program provides therapeutic and recreational programming for young carers between the ages of 5 and 18 in Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to one of our young carers and current volunteers, Samiha.
I believe that it is absolutely critical that we continue to grow programs like YCP. Experiencing the positive impact of YCP, I decided I wanted to be involved in any way that I could to raise awareness about caregiving, especially to raise awareness about young caregivers in Canada. Not only to increase resources and funding, but awareness so other young caregivers would know that there is support out there for children like them. YCP would present me with different opportunities where I could speak about my story if I wanted to, and I was always interested in every single one to try and fulfill this goal of mine. It started with a TVO article when I was 16 years old, and soon we did the Hidden Project and podcast, where I was able to share my story and see my portrait blown up at the Living Arts Center in Mississauga and in Hamilton, and all of it felt so surreal. I think the most monumental moment was when I was asked to be a part of the working group by the Ontario Caregivers Organization to help develop Young Caregivers Connect, the first website where Ontario young caregivers could access support, resources, and a 24/7 hotline. I was seeing real change taking place that could truly change the lives of several young caregivers across Ontario. What makes me arguably the most proud of being a part of YCP is the participation in the creation of the Commonwealth Charter of Young Carers. Reflecting on my experience before becoming a member of YCP and not knowing that there was a term and support for my experience makes me think about how big of an impact the creation of this charter will have on young caregivers to come. Not only is it a matter of recognition and awareness, it can be used to bring countries together to have a unified international approach to supporting young carers. No matter where they come from or where they live, they are able to get the support that they need, which is crucial to their growth. This charter plays a pivotal role in encouraging countries to work together to create real change for young caregivers and the young carer experience. It will make things more tangible when developing policy changes to create support for the young carers. This charter can also help reach other countries outside the Commonwealth, and the young carers internationally can be included in policy and decision-making. Essentially, we will be given a voice we felt that we never had to begin with. When young carers will finally feel like they are being heard, when they feel like they're being given the support that they deserve, they can then also provide the best care for the person that they're caring for. Someone needs to care for the young carers, and the creation of this charter is a step in the right direction. Of course, there are several aspects of caregiving journey that are heartbreaking and so hard for any family to go through, but I can't help acknowledge the few positives that come with it. I still remember from summer camp that year I spoke about in 2015, we were told by the volunteers that as young caregivers, we were natural leaders, we were resilient, patient, and compassionate, and we had these qualities that were instilled in us from such a young age. And looking back, I have to agree. I doubt I would be the same person I am today with these qualities without going through the things that I've gone through as a caregiver. And these are things I'm taking throughout my life journey and in any career I would want to pursue. I wouldn't have been encouraged to reflect on my journey or recognize any strong qualities I have within me if it wasn't for the support of programs like YCP or organizations like OCO, the Ontario Caregivers Organization. So for that, I am truly grateful. I can only hope that these organizations continue to inspire young caregivers the way that they've inspired me, and I want to continue to participate in every way that I can as the years go on. And before I go, I just want to take the time once again to thank everyone here, to all the social workers, the researchers, and everyone attending. It's with your support and hard work, we will continue to make change for these young caregivers. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to be here and to listen to my story.